blood smeared across the walls, a lifeless body at the foot of a grand staircase, and a husband's frantic call to 911 claiming a tragic accident. This is how the story begins. But what really happened that night? As investigators arrived at the scene, something didn't add up. The injuries were too severe, the blood too plentiful for a simple fall. Was this just a terrible mishap? Or was there something far darker lurking beneath the surface? As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered shocking secrets that painted a very different picture of Michael Peterson, the man who claimed to love his wife. They found a hidden life, one filled with bisexual affairs that Kathleen may never have known about. Emails revealing relationships with men, a web of deceit that had been carefully concealed until now. Could these revelations of bisexual affairs have led to a deadly confrontation? Was this the motive that turned a loving husband into a cold-blooded killer? Michael Peterson was a man of many facets, known in Durham, North Carolina, not just as a successful novelist, but also as a public figure with ambitions that extended beyond the literary world. Born in 1943, Peterson's life was marked by a blend of public service and creative expression. His early years were spent in the military, serving with distinction during the Vietnam War. This experience not only shaped his worldview, but also heavily influenced his later work as a writer. His novels, many of which delved into military themes, garnered a measure of success, earning him recognition in literary circles. However, it was the complex web of his personal life that would eventually eclipse his professional achievements, thrusting him into a far more controversial and sinister limelight. Kathleen Atwater, who would later become Kathleen Peterson, was born on February 21, 1953. From a young age, she exhibited a drive and intelligence that would propel her to great heights. After graduating from Duke University with a degree in civil engineering, Kathleen embarked on a career that saw her climb the corporate ladder to become a successful executive at Nortel Networks. Her colleagues and friends admired her for her sharp mind, work ethic, and vibrant personality. Kathleen was a woman who seemingly had it all: a thriving career, a beautiful home, and a family she cherished deeply. The paths of Michael and Kathleen crossed in the 1980s, a time when both were navigating the complexities of their respective marriages. Michael was married to Patricia Sue Peterson, with whom he had 2 sons, Clayton and Todd. Their marriage, though seemingly stable, was marked by underlying tensions that would eventually lead to its dissolution. Kathleen, on the other hand, was married to Fred Atwater and had a daughter, Caitlin. Like Michael, Kathleen's marriage was not without its challenges. Over time, both Michael and Kathleen found solace in each other, leading to a relationship that, while initially extramarital, blossomed into a deep and committed partnership. By 1987, both had divorced their previous spouses, and after a decade of living together, they married, blending their families into what appeared to be a harmonious union. They lived in a large, beautiful home in Durham, a symbol of the success and stability they had seemingly achieved together. Their home became a social hub, often filled with friends and family, as the couple was well integrated into the fabric of their community. Kathleen, in particular, was known for her warmth and compassion, especially towards Michael's 2 adopted daughters, Margaret and Martha Ratliff. These young women had endured the tragic loss of both their biological parents, and Kathleen took them under her wing, providing the nurturing care they so desperately needed. Yet, beneath this veneer of perfection, there were cracks in the foundation of their marriage that would later be exposed in a courtroom. Financial difficulties began to cast a shadow over their lives. Michael's writing career, while still bringing in some recognition, was not as lucrative as it once had been. The pressure to maintain their lifestyle, coupled with the instability at Kathleen's job at Nortel, where the company faced significant challenges, began to strain their relationship. But these financial pressures were not the only secrets lurking in the shadows. There was another side to Michael's life, a hidden world of desires and secrets that would only come to light under the intense scrutiny of a murder investigation, ultimately revealing the darkness beneath the couple's seemingly perfect life. On the evening of December 8, 2001, Michael and Kathleen Peterson were in their expansive Durham home at 1810 Cedar Street. It was a Saturday night, and by all appearances, the couple was enjoying a quiet, intimate evening together. According to Michael, they were celebrating a significant milestone in his career. One of his novels, a World War II-era story based on real events, was being optioned by a Hollywood studio. This development was a beacon of hope for Michael, whose writing career had experienced many highs and lows, and it marked a moment of potential resurgence in his professional life. The couple spent their evening by the pool, sharing a bottle of wine and engaging in conversation. Kathleen, who had been dealing with the stresses of her high-powered executive role at Nortel Networks, appeared relaxed and content. They discussed their plans and shared laughter, creating a moment that seemed to underscore the strength of their partnership. The evening, by all accounts, was uneventful. Just another quiet night at home for the Petersons, or so it seemed. According to Michael's account, around 2 a.m., Kathleen decided to head inside to bed, leaving him to finish his drink by the pool. He claimed that after about 30 minutes, he also decided to go inside. However, what Michael found when he entered the house would shatter any illusion of a peaceful evening. Kathleen was lying at the bottom of their grand staircase, unconscious and bleeding profusely. The scene was nothing short of a nightmare. Blood was splattered on the walls and pooled around Kathleen's body, suggesting that she had suffered severe trauma. Her injuries were grievous, with multiple wounds to her head. In a state of panic, Michael called 911, his voice filled with desperation as he told the operator that his wife had fallen down the stairs. He frantically urged the dispatcher to send an ambulance, but despite his pleas, it was already too late by the time emergency responders arrived. Kathleen was pronounced dead at the scene. Initially, the situation was perceived as a tragic accident. Kathleen, perhaps under the influence of alcohol, had fallen down the stairs in their large, multi-level home. The grand wooden staircase, which could easily have been the site of such an accident, seemed to provide a plausible explanation for her fatal injuries. However, something about the scene troubled the first responders. The sheer amount of blood, combined with the nature and extent of Kathleen's injuries, raised immediate suspicions. It was highly unusual for a simple fall to result in such significant blood loss and such severe head trauma. The scene was too chaotic, too violent, to be easily explained by a mere stumble. As the morning light began to filter through the windows of the Peterson home, what had initially been considered a tragic accident started to take on the appearance of something far more sinister. The police were notified, and an investigation into Kathleen's death was swiftly launched. Subsequently, Kathleen Peterson's body was transported to the North Carolina office of the Chief Medical Examiner, where Dr. Deborah Radish conducted a detailed autopsy. The results of this examination would prove to be a critical turning point in the case, transforming it from what was initially perceived as a tragic accident into a potential homicide investigation. Dr. Radish's findings were nothing short of alarming. Kathleen had sustained 7 deep lacerations on her scalp, primarily concentrated at the back and top of her head. These injuries were particularly perplexing because, despite their severity, there were no accompanying skull fractures or significant brain injuries, findings that would typically be expected if the wounds were the result of blunt force trauma from a fall. This discrepancy immediately raised questions about the true cause of these injuries. The medical examiner concluded that these lacerations were consistent with multiple impacts from a light, yet rigid object. This conclusion was pivotal as it directly contradicted the initial assumption that Kathleen's injuries resulted from a simple fall down the stairs. Instead, the nature of the wounds suggested that she had been struck repeatedly, which indicated a possible assault rather than an accident. Dr. Radish's examination revealed additional troubling details. Kathleen had sustained other injuries, including bruises on her arms and wrists, which could potentially be defensive wounds, signs that she might have tried to protect herself during an attack. Furthermore, a small fracture was found in her thyroid cartilage, adding to the evidence that her death was not the result of an accidental fall. The cumulative effect of these injuries led Dr. Radish to determine that Kathleen's cause of death was homicidal assault. With this shocking revelation, the investigation into Kathleen Peterson's death took a new direction. The police, now operating under the assumption that they were dealing with a homicide, turned their attention to the only person known to be in the house at the time of Kathleen's death, her husband, Michael Peterson. As the primary suspect, Michael's life came under intense scrutiny as investigators began to explore every facet of the Petersons' lives, searching for clues that might explain how such a violent incident could have occurred. The investigation of the scene at the bottom of the staircase was comprehensive. Forensic experts conducted a blood spatter analysis to determine how Kathleen's blood had ended up on the walls and staircase. The patterns of blood spatter appeared inconsistent with the scenario of a simple fall, further supporting the theory that Kathleen had been beaten. However, blood spatter interpretation is notoriously subjective, and this evidence would later become a point of intense debate in the courtroom. As detectives delved deeper into the case, they discovered, or rather, failed to find, an object that could have been crucial to the investigation. A custom-made fireplace tool known as a blowpoke, gifted to Kathleen by her sister, was missing from the house. With its long, thin, and rigid design, this tool seemed like a plausible candidate for the weapon that inflicted the injuries on Kathleen's head. The blowpoke's absence fueled suspicions, although it would later be found and introduced as evidence by the defense. The case quickly escalated from what initially seemed like a routine investigation into a full-scale criminal inquiry. As law enforcement delved deeper, it became clear that the physical evidence alone was not the only factor drawing their attention. Michael Peterson's personal life began to unravel in ways that shocked even those who thought they knew him well. Detectives, already suspicious due to the inconsistencies between Kathleen's injuries and Michael's account of the events, started to dig into his background. What they found would later play a crucial role in building the prosecution's case against him. One of the most significant revelations to emerge during the investigation was Michael Peterson's bisexuality, a secret he had kept hidden from most people, including, presumably, his wife, Kathleen. Investigators discovered a series of explicit emails between Michael and various men, revealing that he had been engaging in relationships outside his marriage. This discovery became a cornerstone of the prosecution's theory, as they speculated that Kathleen might have discovered Michael's secret life and confronted him on the night of her death. According to the prosecution, this confrontation could have escalated into a violent altercation, leading to Kathleen's death. The potential for public humiliation and the fear of his marriage breaking down were posited by the prosecution as powerful motives for Michael to resort to murder. They argued that these pressures, coupled with the couple's financial difficulties, might have driven Michael to kill Kathleen in a desperate attempt to preserve his life as he knew it. On the other hand, the defense would later counter this theory by suggesting that Kathleen was aware of Michael's bisexuality and had accepted it as part of their unconventional yet still loving marriage. As the investigation progressed, another critical development occurred. Investigators revisited the death of Elizabeth Ratliff, a close family friend of the Petersons who had died in Germany under eerily similar circumstances in 1985. Ratliff was found dead at the bottom of a staircase in her home, and her death was initially ruled accidental, attributed to a cerebral hemorrhage. However, the striking parallels between her death and Kathleen's led authorities to exhume Ratliff's body for a second autopsy conducted in North Carolina. This second autopsy concluded that Ratliff had actually died from blunt force trauma, not a cerebral hemorrhage, as initially thought. The prosecution seized upon this information, suggesting that Michael Peterson might have had prior experience staging a death to look like an accident. This bolstered their argument that Kathleen's death was no mere accident, but a carefully orchestrated murder. As these revelations surfaced, the case against Michael Peterson expanded far beyond the initial investigation into Kathleen's death. The media quickly latched on to the salacious details of Michael's secret life, and the case garnered widespread public attention. The combination of a seemingly idyllic family, a mysterious death, and the sensational aspects of Michael's private life made for a media sensation, feeding the public's fascination with the case. Detectives continued to gather evidence meticulously. The investigation became increasingly focused on constructing a comprehensive case that could withstand the rigors of a court trial. They scrutinized the Petersons' finances, interviewed friends and family, and sought any possible motive or explanation for why Michael would have wanted to harm his wife. As more details emerged, it became increasingly clear that the case was anything but straightforward, setting the stage for a courtroom battle where competing narratives would vie for the jury's belief. The trial of Michael Peterson began on July 1, 2003, in Durham, North Carolina. Both the prosecution and the defense entered the courtroom with well-prepared strategies, each side determined to present a narrative that would convince the jury of their version of events. In their opening statement, the prosecution laid out a detailed timeline of the events leading up to Kathleen Peterson's death, highlighting the financial troubles the couple faced, the revelation of Michael Peterson's bisexuality, and the similarities between Kathleen's death and the earlier death of Elizabeth Ratliff. They painted a picture of a man who, when faced with the potential collapse of his carefully constructed life, resorted to murder to protect his secrets. The prosecution emphasized the physical evidence, particularly the 7 deep lacerations on Kathleen's scalp, which they argued were consistent with being struck by a blunt object, not a fall. The defense, led by attorney David Rudolph, countered by challenging the credibility of the prosecution's evidence. In their opening statement, they argued that Kathleen's death was a tragic accident resulting from a fall down the stairs after an evening of drinking. Rudolph highlighted the lack of a definitive murder weapon and the absence of any defensive wounds that would indicate a struggle. He also questioned the reliability of the blood spatter analysis, which was a central piece of the prosecution's case. The defense's narrative centered on the idea that Michael Peterson was a loving husband who had no reason to harm his wife, and that the prosecution's case was based on conjecture rather than solid evidence. The prosecution called several witnesses to the stand, including the medical examiner, Dr. Deborah Radish, who testified that Kathleen's injuries were consistent with a homicidal assault. Blood spatter expert Dwayne Deaver also testified, stating that the blood patterns at the scene indicated that Kathleen had been beaten rather than having fallen down the stairs. The prosecution sought to bolster their case by presenting evidence related to Michael Peterson's bisexuality, arguing that this aspect of his life provided a motive for the murder. They also introduced testimony regarding the death of Elizabeth Ratliff, attempting to draw parallels between the two cases. The defense mounted a vigorous challenge to this evidence. They presented their own experts, including forensic scientist Dr. Henry Lee, who testified that the blood spatter could be consistent with an accidental fall. The defense also emphasized the lack of physical evidence directly linking Michael Peterson to the crime, such as fingerprints on a weapon or eyewitness testimony. They argued that the prosecution's theory was based on speculation, and that the similarities between Kathleen's death and Elizabeth Ratliff's were purely coincidental. One of the most dramatic moments in the trial came when the defense introduced the blowpoke, which had been missing during the initial investigation. The blowpoke, found covered in cobwebs in the Petersons' garage, showed no signs of being used in a violent act. The defense used this to argue that the prosecution's case was built on a faulty premise, as the alleged murder weapon was not involved in Kathleen's death. As the trial progressed, it became increasingly clear that the case was not as straightforward as either side had initially presented. The jury was faced with two conflicting narratives, one in which Michael Peterson was a cold-blooded murderer, and another in which he was a devoted husband whose wife died in a tragic accident. The prosecution's case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, including the pattern of Kathleen's injuries, Michael's financial situation, and his secret life. The defense, on the other hand, focused on creating reasonable doubt by challenging the prosecution's forensic evidence and presenting alternative explanations for Kathleen's death. The trial lasted nearly 3 months, with both sides presenting extensive testimony and evidence. As the closing arguments were made, the jury was left with the difficult task of determining whether the evidence presented was sufficient to convict Michael Peterson beyond a reasonable doubt. On October 10, 2003, the jury delivered their verdict. After deliberating for 4 days, they found Michael Peterson guilty of the first-degree murder of his wife, Kathleen Peterson. The verdict shocked many, including those who had followed the trial closely. Michael Peterson was immediately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that sent a strong message regarding the severity of the crime. For the prosecution, it was a significant victory, but for the defense and Michael's supporters, it was a devastating blow. David Rudolph, Peterson's lead attorney, expressed his disappointment, maintaining that the evidence did not support a guilty verdict and vowing to appeal the decision. Following the conviction, Peterson's legal team filed several appeals, arguing that the trial had been marred by procedural errors and that the evidence presented was insufficient to justify the conviction. One of the key issues raised in the appeals was the testimony of blood spatter analyst Dwayne Deaver. In 2010, it was revealed that Deaver had exaggerated his qualifications and had provided misleading testimony in multiple cases, including Peterson's. This revelation led to a significant breakthrough for the defense. In 2011, a judge vacated Peterson's conviction, ruling that Deaver's testimony had been materially misleading and had likely influenced the jury's decision. Michael Peterson was released from prison and placed under house arrest while awaiting a new trial. This turn of events cast doubt on the integrity of the original trial and sparked renewed interest in the case. After years of legal wrangling, in 2017, Michael Peterson entered an Alford plea to the reduced charge of voluntary manslaughter. An Alford plea allows a defendant to maintain their innocence while acknowledging that the prosecution has enough evidence to secure a conviction. By entering this plea, Peterson avoided a retrial and the possibility of returning to prison. He was sentenced to time already served and was officially released, bringing an end to the long and contentious legal battle. The Peterson case remains one of the most debated and analyzed criminal cases in recent history. It has been the subject of extensive media coverage, including the documentary series The Staircase, which offered a detailed look at the trial and its aftermath. The case has raised important questions about the reliability of forensic evidence, the influence of media on public perception, and the complexities of the American legal system. Today, Michael Peterson lives as a free man, but the questions surrounding Kathleen's death remain as contentious as ever. Was this a tragic accident, or did hidden desires and secrets spiral into something far more sinister? The twists and turns of this case have left many wondering where the truth truly lies. But as you reflect on this complex case, consider this. How much can we ever really know about someone's private life, even in the closest of relationships? And could the truth of what happened on that staircase still be out there, waiting to be uncovered? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think justice was served, or is there more to the story? And how do you think the revelation of Michael's bisexual affairs influenced the outcome of the trial? If you found this story as gripping as we did, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into cases like this one, where the lines between love, betrayal, and murder blur in the most chilling ways. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for more, and until next time, stay curious.